Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. So in this video, I'm going to explain you the tips and structures for an 8 mark and a 12 mark question. The paper that I'm using as an example is March 2024, paper 12. Alright, so first for the 8 mark, on section B you are advised to spend not more than 40 minutes. So it's like 2 minutes per mark. An 8 mark question needs to be solved in 16 minutes and a 12 mark question needs to be solved in 24 minutes. So if you have a clock in front of you, or if it's possible to carry a watch, you can time yourself as well. So in an 8 mark question, you can clearly see that both questions start from the term analyze. It clearly depicts that there are no marks for evaluation. And in both questions, only 2 content points are required to score full marks because of the fact that knowledge in both questions is of 2 marks. But it's important to note that whatever content points you are writing, if let's say you're writing 2 limitations of sampling, or let's say you're writing 2 different barriers to entrepreneurship, you have to make sure that both of these content points are suited with the relevant example in business context. So you can talk about school, restaurant, bank, airline, hospital, hotel, or any other business that you've been comfortable with, to be very honest. So in an 8 mark question, you can clearly see the tips that I've mentioned, that both paragraphs need to have examples and it is preferable to start with a definition. So in this case, if let's say for example, you can mention the definition of an entrepreneur to begin with, and in this case you can mention the definition of sampling to begin with. So let's say, just for example purposes, I'm going to explain as to how you'll form a sample paragraph in question number 5 part A. So if let's say for example we talk about limitations of sampling, and I've written a limitation that sample may be unrepresentative or not fully representative of the target market. Now just as you mentioned the knowledge point, I always advise my students to directly go into the example mode or application mode. So in this case I've mentioned a business, a restaurant that specializes in seafood may find the sample to be unrepresentative of target market if random sampling is done, as customers may not prefer seafood. If you are unaware with the concept of random sampling, you can just mention in your own words that there may be some people who may be interviewed but they may not be lovers of seafood, or they may only prefer a certain brand of seafood such as fish. And therefore, if this happens, if you now think if you get an incomplete idea as to what customers want, what would happen? If you're a restaurant selling seafood, pause this video, stop, think. If you're a restaurant selling seafood and you get less information regarding customer preferences, what will happen? This will lead to ineffective decisions being made, since the restaurant owner may not get to know the most popular seafood cuisines and thus won't be able to offer what customers demand. So ineffective decision making has been seen to be an impact of the example that you just wrote. Now focus on one point. Since I gave an example, my impact is also talking about the business in context, and that is exactly what you have to do. It is advised that you mention the impact in context of the business. Now what would happen if you take ineffective decisions? What would happen if you're not able to offer what customers demand? If this happens, this will eventually result in, now this is a chain of analysis. So you're going to mention a chain of analysis. Try to go for like 3 impacts if you can. So one immediate impact, then the impact that follows, and then the last impact. And then your paragraph would end. And you have to make 2 paragraphs like this. So for example, if there's another limitation that sampling may involve cost, so you have to develop it in the same structure. So knowledge, identify the point, then give an example in context, then an impact which discusses the same example, and then a further chain of analysis. So this is what you have to do in an 8 mark question. For a 12 mark question, I'm going to use this particular example. Mind you that if you're attempting 5A, you need to attempt 5B, and if you're attempting 6A, you need to attempt 6B. But since this video is for tutorial purposes and I experienced a lot of my students facing problems in this particular question, therefore I've used this as an example. The most important objective, whenever you see terms like this, the most important function, the most important reason, the most important objective, always make a note that you have to comment your opinion in the conclusion paragraph, whether you believe that this is the most important objective or not, and if you do so, why. If you don't, then why as well. So the most important objective of a public sector energy supplier Public sector means that it is falling under the responsibility of state ownership, or in other words, the government. And energy supplier would mean a firm providing you with electricity. It is the environmental objective. Environmental objective would involve sustainability. So now think, before attending this question, now think, how can we incorporate sustainability when it comes to supplying electricity? Such as using, let's say, for example, renewable methods. Now think of the impact. Why do you think it's important for a government-based energy supplier to focus on sustainability when it comes to providing electricity? Because let's say the public sector will have a huge network, so it will be able to distribute the energy to a wide range of people, especially if it's being supplied by a sustainable method. Evaluate this view, 12 marks. So for this 12 mark question, you have knowledge of 2 marks, which is the same as 8 marks. Application of 2 marks, which is then again same as the 8 mark question. Analysis is here of 2 marks, which means that only one chain of analysis in a certain paragraph will suffice, is enough. You don't need to make a chain of analysis in both the paragraphs. And then you have 6 marks for evaluation. And how do I break these 6 marks? I give 2 marks for conclusion and 4 marks for evaluation that you do throughout the answer. Alright, so for a 12 mark question, let me show you a sample. Let's say, for example, you can follow the color coding. So knowledge, application, analysis and evaluation will follow and will reflect the colors that I've mentioned here. Alright, so orange stands for knowledge. Knowledge is the basic point. Just the same thing you did with an 8 mark question. And then you already know what happens next. You come up with application. So in purple, you can see an application. And the application is, for example, a public sector energy supplier is likely to produce energy through renewable resources such as wind, water and solar mediums rather than coal. Now think of the impact. Remember, this is a public sector business, so profits will be increased, may not be relevant. So market share will increase, may not be relevant. The typical objectives of a private sector business may not apply here, and if you were to mention those impacts, you will be losing marks. So think, if let's say a country uses more and more sustainable energy, what would be the impact on its government? What would be the impact on the welfare of the citizens? So I've developed an impact. This is likely to improve the businesses and the government's reputation as socially responsible entities in the country. Now this is one impact. Then moving on to building a chain of analysis, citizens willingly paying more tax for a sustainable future, helping government to obtain funding easily. Now I have written this particular paragraph in the same manner as I wrote the 8 mark questions paragraph, right? So you can clearly see that you can be awarded with marks for knowledge, application and analysis. But since we need to evaluate this, so now think, what would happen that you fail to get the benefit that you desire of? What would happen that environmental objective may not be the most important objective, or the government may find it difficult to implement the environmental objective, and thus if you find it difficult to implement, you will find it difficult to realize its benefits, right? So now we are going to evaluate. So for example, however, this may also result in prices to go higher, causing low income citizens to protest as energy is a necessity and then they won't be able to afford. So what you've mentioned here is that it would improve government's reputation. But if this happens, government's reputation may not increase as you predict it to increase. This is you evaluating your own benefit. Likewise, moreover, the extent to which achieving this objective will be beneficial will also depend on how wealthy is the public sector in the first place. If you are in a struggling economy, if you are in an underdeveloped economy, the government is less likely to have funds, and even the working population or the demographics would suggest that people do not have high incomes to support high taxes, and therefore if this happens, you may not be able to reap the benefits of setting the environmental objective. Hence, in this case, perhaps providing welfare or cheaper prices or resources to the citizens at large may be more relevant. So you make another paragraph in the same structure, you come up with more points, you can refer to the marking scheme if you want, and then once you are done with 2 paragraphs of the main body, a definition of what public sector enterprises are and their functions, 2 or 3 lines, then you leave a line, you make another paragraph in the same structure I just showed you, and then you make another body paragraph in the same structure with the new point and new examples, and then you conclude. Now when you're concluding, I just mentioned in the start of the video, or not, if not in the start of this question, the most important objective. So you need to give your 2 cents on it, whether you think it's the most important objective or not. And I've seen many people to just write a summary of what they wrote above. Do not do this. If you suggest that this is actually the most important objective, then why is environmental objective even more important than providing resources at large, than providing welfare at large? Why is environmental objective the most important objective for public sector energy business and not any other objective? So you need to come up with your clear opinion, supported with something that can be concrete and a point that can prove to have weightage over all other content points. If you want, you can even mention a certain depend on factor that it would also depend whether it's important or not if the country is developed or developing. Mind you, if you have mentioned a similar comment in the above paragraphs, then please do not repeat it in the conclusion. I hope this helps. Thank you.